Welcome and thank you all for joining us for the book release party for Claudia Castroluna's One River, A Thousand Voices. I'm Brett Vanden Heuvel, and I'm the executive director of Columbia Riverkeeper. And we have two amazing poets sharing their work related to the Columbia River tonight. And in these challenging times, we all need more art in our lives. So we're really grateful for the opportunity to talk to Tyrone and Claudia tonight. So I'd like to introduce you to Tyrone Ross Thompson. Tyrone is Wampum Nez Perce of the Columbia River. He is the grandson of Moses Jerome Thompson, who was the son of Henry Pusha Thompson, and his father was Tommy Cooney Thompson, the direct lineage of the founders of the Celilo Fish Committee. Tyrone is an alumni of Columbia Basin College and is working toward a bachelor's degree at Eastern Washington University. He hosts an open mic night on the Yakima Indian Reservation and has written for the digital magazine Last Real Indians and used poetry to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day at Eastern Washington. His intent is to build with poetry a medium to heal self, to assist communities that have experienced social ills, and as a chance of resolve for kinships. So Tyrone, we're really honored to have you here tonight. Welcome.
Hello. Yes, I'm glad to be here and very fortunate that Claudia asked me to read. And I've been writing poetry for about 11 years. And the following poem is March 10th, 1957, Celilo Falls Inundation. It was 2 decades before the hereditary wampum bloodline created and tried to effectively speak at the behest of the people, to be acknowledged, because subjugated forces had limited people for speaking for their own living. The unconscious divide and conquer. Maybe, but a colonial trick and created fear of each other. Part-time sovereignty, part-time brother and sister. Imperial rule against the odds at one another. All for greed, institutionally fed. A legacy of oppression within a century. The repression forces destroyed indigenous humanity. A continuation of a few voices for collective agreement that dictate lives of small sentiment, because decisions are based on monetary value and decayed spiritual life of intermixed beliefs and habitable traits that became a loss to spiritual power. Tribes are split and assimilated. Some circles are a patchy network of colonized beings, only sticking to the written rules, but living like they're part of the status quo. Your heart depleted and conflicted from the start. These leaders today speak of power in place of ownership to a sacred place, continually forgetting this water is a life force, giving creation to all forms of life beyond their comprehension, because they're led astray by titles, ownership, and recognition of imperial titles that is surreal to how the nations once lived. The dreamer faith that once thrived at the center of it all, a divine power that connected the indigenous nations and trade center that became a victim of an environmental holocaust. The life center of the Columbia River lost its spiritual connection, and at the same time, recognition of people to the 5 islands and a connection to what was once a pristine place in all the world. The islands had markings of our indigenous place in this world, a reminder of the ignorance of Western progress, and to remember the legacy that was once Celilo Falls, and to never forget this crime against indigenous humanity, but that the suppressor force can never wipe away that history or memory. And the following poem is titled Fish Ladder and Horsemanship. Who has the authority to decide what ancestors needed? Decolonized by dividing history, the blessings of wool for capitalism, the trenches of imperialism. I remember infant's heart failure if you were after reading a eulogy and not even told at the funeral. I remember a red car wreck, a red car's aftermath in a ditch. At another time, finding a lifeless body, and various others buried by suicide, violence, and slow death. Is the wool of caskets less valuable because of bias and false wealth? It took years to accept family loss and face an addiction, the disease and recovery regret, lost connection while rebuilding with family, while searching history and recited with Shawnee humanity. Nonetheless, Tenino, the western side of Celilo Falls and source of redemption, the divine center of historical importance, through melanin and blood vessels a remembrance. Complete warfare and spiritual survival. From here, the trail started of original kinship. Represent at the banks of the river at Wallula is the confluence, where 2,500 Nez Perce showed the horsemanship and non-treated defiance. 165 years of assimilation before the constant one-upmanship, before the insistent validation. Any village people visited, from Land of the Butterflies to Tenino, where people are accepted. Before the colonial seal, sincere nobility, the hearts are ruled by matrilineal with unmatched dignity. Hunway had the power of song and foretold of life changing, and her symbols we acknowledge and hold. Through sinew and symbol and letter to the creator, Celilo Falls Fish Committee's memory is vivid. The struggle for basic dignity and power, the tenants' calm and impatient urgency, waiting to be released for Washatie humanity. History as deep as obsidian, and 200 YM warriors who supported Kamayakan, and constantly heard of these stories and fear responsibility. At times, I didn't want this accountability. 1867, a decade after the war, a YM dreamer danced at Celilo and predicted a canal that would flood the 5 islands and the home buried. On March 10, 1957, born 2 centuries too late is a word stated for reevaluation of resentment of divide and conquer, the century's injury and confliction. Colonial systemic oppression often caused moments of doubt, the memory neglected, and death caused repression, created and living by survivors' remorse, the pain remnant, unknown future course. Nevertheless, slow reinvention, the lineage from power and place, from isolation to redemption, riding by collective drummers and dreamers, with the goal of building collective power. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tyrone. Yeah, that's powerful stuff. Thank you for the Celilo poem or discussion of Celilo too. You know, the drowning of Celilo Falls in 1957 was one of the most devastating acts of colonialism and destruction of the river. I know that your family helped maintain a sustainable fishery at Celilo for, you know, since time immemorial, and your words are very powerful and come from an authentic place with the deepest roots along this river. So really honored to have you here tonight and to hear your words.
Yeah, thank you.
And there will if people have questions or comments for Tyrone, you can type them into the chat box. Because there's so many people on here tonight, we're kind of moderating this, and so if you type questions or comments in, I will read them when we have time at the end. You can also, Tyrone has a book available. You can search for it and find it in Amazon and other places. It's called Washani Tales, Wyoming Poetry. So if you want to see more from Tyrone, encourage you to check that out and buy his book. Okay, so before I introduce Claudia, I want to tell you the quick agenda for the rest of the time. First of all, after Claudia reads, we'd love to hear from you for questions for Claudia or for Tyrone. And as I mentioned, you can type them into the chat box, and then together at the end, we'll have a discussion with Tyrone and Claudia. About a year ago, I learned that the Washington Poet Laureate wrote a long form book about the Columbia River, and was really excited about this and a series of events and readings that she was going to do. And then when COVID shut those down, Claudia reached out to Columbia Riverkeeper and asked if we'd be interested in partnering with her on her book release. And so we jumped at that chance, and so we're here tonight to do that. So for those of you who are new to Columbia Riverkeeper, we're a nonprofit organization that works to protect and restore the Columbia River and all life connected to it. Gabby, do you want to go to speaker view? And or the gallery view? My coworker, Gabriela Garcia, is helping tonight. She's done a lot of the logistics for tonight, so we appreciate all of that. Hey, Tyrone, it's sticking with showing you. Do you mind muting for now until the Q&A part? So anyways, for those of you who are new to Columbia Riverkeeper, we're a nonprofit organization that works to protect and restore the Columbia and all life connected to it. And to do this, we protect salmon habitat. We fight against some of the fossil fuel terminals that are proposed on the Columbia, including coal and oil and fracked gas. We work to stop illegal pollution. And a big part of what we do is just trying to inspire and motivate people to get engaged in some of these really important issues on the Columbia. So we have over 12,000 members who power this work, and thank you to all of our members who are joining tonight. We appreciate you. And if you're not a member, I encourage you to join Columbia Riverkeeper tonight. You can do so on our website, and to follow us on social media. We keep people updated on different ways to get engaged on the Columbia. So let's turn to introducing Claudia Castroluna. So Claudia is the Washington State Poet Laureate and served as Seattle's first civic poet. She's the recipient of an Academy of American Poets Poet Laureate Fellowship, and she's the author of Killing Marias, which was a finalist for the Washington State Book Award in 2018. She's the author of One River, 1,000 Voices, and the chapbook This City. Born in El Salvador, she came to the United States in 1981. And her nonfiction has appeared in Yes Magazine, and the anthologies This Is the Place and Vanishing Points, contemporary Salvadoran narrative. So I want to show you the book tonight, which is a beautiful book that you can buy on Chin Music Press website, the publisher, or Columbia Riverkeeper's website under the shop tab. And so, hello, Claudia. We're honored to be part of your book release tonight. I feel like we should release this book. It's getting cagey.
Yes, this is such a wonderful moment. Thank you. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Tyrone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Books are such journeys to bring into the world, and I'm just amazed that this is happening, that Columbia Riverkeeper agreed to partner with me to find a way to give back to the river. they do so much on its behalf. And to Tyrone, thank you for your poems. Tyrone, you could feel the river running through your voice. I appreciate you so much and your work. And so I wanted to take a few moments to thank a few people, because the book has been in the works for a long time. To bring us here, it's been in the works for a long time. So first of all, I wanted to thank Humanities Washington and ArtsWA, the Commission for the Arts for Washington State, who managed the Poet Laureate program. I wanted to thank the Academy of American Poets for the fellowship I received, which allowed me to travel the length of the river and to meet and being community people along the way, including Tyrone, whom I met through the Yakima Coffee House Poets very early on, before I even started traveling along the river. And Tyrone, in a way, in some ways, literally but symbolically, has been along with me in this entire journey. So thank you again, Tyrone. To the Seattle School of Visual Concepts, and to Jenny Wilkson, the amazing Jenny Wilkson. It so happened that I was the artist in residence at the School of Visual Concepts at the same time that I started my term as laureate. And it was there working with the team there and with Jenny that we designed the book, figure out I always dreamt of having an accordion book, and Jenny is so amazing, and we made it happen, and actually printed some of them by hand. And Chin Music Press, thank you, Bruce Rutledge, for printing the version that we're celebrating tonight. And then lastly, of course, to you, Brett, and to Columbia Riverkeeper for agreeing to partner up with me, and I do hope that the book has a big life from now on, because you are a beneficiary of the sales of the book if they're bought through you and through the publisher directly. And so thank you for saying that. When I started this project, I was interested in the human ecology of the river. But in the process of traveling along it, I came to hear the river itself. The river is its own superlative force. Native peoples have recognized this from time immemorial. No matter whether standing on a plateau near Vantage or anywhere along the gorge, the river appears vast and invincible. But it became clear to me that this marvelous being who sustains so much life and has done so for thousands of years, as well as industry, is a fragile being. It could go away. That was one of the deepest realizations I had traveling. And it would be due to our hubris and carelessness if this were to happen. So for me, the book is a way of recognizing the river's own spirit, its own path across millennia, its own ways of thinking about it, of being in the world, which are a mystery to us. And I would say that we must not take our rivers for granted. As immense as the Columbia is, it is delicate, and Brett spoke to that at the beginning. So I hope we all do our part to protect all rivers. And to me, because I've become so attached to this particular river, the Columbia River. And so before I read the poem, which is One Long Breath, I wanted just to share with you some of photographs to bring the river into this space. So these are pictures I've taken traveling along the Columbia River. The first one is from Kettle Falls, where I started my travels. This is about maybe 25 miles south of the Canadian border. This is a early morning photograph. And the next one, then I follow the river south. This is standing at the meeting place of the Spokane and the Columbia rivers. There's so many of these convergences along the Columbia, and each of them is just breathtaking and special. The next one is, this is Brewster. This is standing on the edge of the school park. The high school and the elementary school are just up the street. This is what the kids see there, looking at the river moving south toward Pateros. And here now in Pateros is this incredible merging of the Twisp and the Columbia. It's so calm. There was such an energy of release and calmness in this place. And then here, moving down river, is Wenatchee in the fall last year. This was maybe late October, early November. Very beautiful with the foliage changing. My next stop going down was Mattawa, which is a desert air. There's across from Vantage is nearby, and this is just a quiet moment there as the sun went down. And here, this is the Snake and the confluence of the Snake and the Columbia on a very, very rainy January morning. There was no sound here except for the sound of the rain falling and melting into the river. And just now, Tyrone, hearing you talk about Wallula, which is just up a few miles up from here, so striking to have your words. This picture now for me has a totally different meaning after hearing your poem. This was, believe it or not, after a deluge. The next morning we woke up in Richland. I woke up in Richland to this gorgeous sunrise. And then the next slide is of the gorge. This is a summer photograph. You could see the sky very different, this vastness, just this blue upon blue. And finally, the Columbia River Interstate Bridge on one side, Vancouver, on the other, Portland. This is, again, a sunset photograph in February. My intention was to follow, and I still plan to do this, but I did a series of very wonderful readings around this area of the Columbia, and then I could not travel anymore because of COVID. And hopefully I'll be able to retake my travels to go meet and photograph and be with the river where it meets the ocean, travel south, travel west to Ilwaco and the mouth of the river. Thank you. It transports me, those photographs transports me to my being in communion with it, because I live in Seattle and I traveled a lot back and forth, being with the river. And those experiences then are what became One River, 1,000 Voices. Those experiences, as well as reading and meeting people such as Tyrone. So this is a long, as poems go, it's a rather long one, but it flows, it has its own flow. So One River, 1,000 Voices. When world was clamshell and heaven and earth mirrored each other, the blue of one hue to the other, when mountains spit fire and lava, and their igneous entrails scorched earth and suffocated heavens. Back when time teetered on eternal night and light's brink augured the unbounded, burgeoning imagination of life to come. Before ponderosa and hemlock sharpened their needles thus, and cedar learned to lengthen its scales, when camas stained canyons endlessly cerulean blue, and over vast prairies flowers surrendered their yolk-stained petals to wind's pool. All the while, time braided itself into your verdigris flow. Nature's godly audacity sowed mountains, crushed boulders, injected into each new grain of sand mineral traces from the Milky River up in heaven, and into each salmon egg elemental mooring, so that when grown, she would know to risk gill and gut on her return from ocean's depths to your sweet streams for the chance to choose death to ensure future. Ever before the first human pupils bent in marvel and awe at the rumble and lightning, grace and muscular rigging of your current. In this earliest time before humans came to call themselves in reference to you, river peoples and people of the river, fusing their being to your being, before the ancients taught first peoples what to call the things of the world, and humans flourished along the length of you and learned to honor and guard forevermore your presence and memory. A sage woman etched into stone stories of her people and sat beside a quiet pool along rocky shores, hearing something of herself in the music and gargle of your waters. Before human tongues called a place of roaring, sizzling falls, Shonikwu, and your majestic self, names of reverence, even before brave men perched on wooden planks and snared leaping salmon on their improbable journey to spawning sites, before prayers of praise and gratitude, before songs of sorrow and joy, before words spoken and unspoken rained upon your current, when cadence and rhythm of dancing feet transmitted heart and spleen, yearning and gratitude down to your silty floor. Certainly, thousands of years before captains jostled and repeatedly sailed past your ocean frontier, then sank along your bars, before a man called you Columbia, you had long been Nichiwana. For millennia running unbounded, hoiling coiled within your current, arias of summer suns and howls of countless wolf moons. Most certainly, before your chilly current was with concrete penned and silenced, so that your icy pulse degenerated to tepid lakes, before plentiful salmon runs came to live their splendor only in the memory of those who were to them witness and their descendants. When man and woman were such, not Indian man and not Indian woman, a time before treaty and broken treaty had entered the lexicon of Cilician, Sahaptin, and Chinookan languages, before men who had lived by their own rules were forced from their lands, before all the befores, you, river, had already been called 1,001 names, each name for every animal, creature, and vegetable spirit that ever breathed, mated, and died, that ever flower or shed a spore, each tree, each flower, each bulb, fish, mammal, insect, bird, each calling you a name of their own, from large to small, from scaly to winged, from fur to feather, each tiny, indebted to your grace. Scree, huckleberry, sage, pine, camas, alder, poplar, maple, lupin, deer, bear, coyote, elk, quail, grouse, hawk, eagle, bat, fox, wren, warbler, butterfly, burbot, salmon, lamprey, sturgeon, sculpin, all the flora, all the fauna calling to you in dreams of awakening and in sobering dreams of change and demise, each name in every dimension perfect, iridescent as the miracle of a fish scale, fragile as dragonflies' wings, as truly reed, sturdy and resilient as bitter root. Each diurnal and nocturnal creature, her features embodying her own melodious name for life. The owl who swoops to snatch in night's downy hush the unsuspecting frog, trout whose rainbow swagger flares gamefully your waters as we call out to them, they call out to you. Woodpecker tribes, beaver bands, cornflower clumps, each living thing with her own ardent name, on the hoof, on the scale, on the feather, on the fur, on the leaf, on the mud, on the beak, on the bark. One river, 1,000 names, 1,000 voices chanting river songs, singing songs of place, charting songs of belonging. Sage women and wise men sense these human nomenclatures at the margins of their knowing, but never possess them, for those names belong only to you, river, to your meandering ways, to the islands in your midst, to the channels of your delta, to the splendor of your gorge, to the rage of your falls, to the turbulence of your current, to the eternal, unpredictable, and silence, to the language of time. O river, impervious to human foibles, kinks, and skill, to wolves' backbone and cunning, to salamander's tremulous heart, to the rustling of poplar tree leaves, river, you against whom people and creatures harness survival and hope, what names do you call us when wings at sunset fold, and later when we surrender to night our eyes? For it is hubris to grant faith and dominion only to alphabet and sword. It is hubris not to consider that you who for millennia have run and pumped don't also have manner and fashion of your own, just because your course was marked on a map as territory and a four-syllable name on you imposed does not make your riverness conquerable. For all we know and think we know, human experience is pinhead to the universe of your waters. As mist from mountains rises at dawn, and to dusk belong the spirits who tease lush lavender skies. Yours is the thingness and riverness of you. O great river, O giver of life, O keeper of time, then, as you shall again flow supreme, singular to your mission, that being your effulgent return, first to ocean, the great water, then to cloud, diaphanous water, then to rain and snow, shaped water, to return back down mountains, channeling rills over mossy hills, feeding rivulets, quietly resting for a moment in the swirl of a chilly eddy, hustling onto streams eventually to your own mighty torque and rhythm, whose thunderous physics bolt you forward through canyons, around bends, past floodplains, shaping plateaus and prairies to estuary and delta, finally to empty yourself, unrelenting for the future. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, I want to show you how it unfolds, how it just becomes this giant, long, well, a long book, mimicking, of course, the flow of the river to its meeting with the ocean.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Yeah, and I mean, obviously the poem is amazing, but it's a very beautiful book, a very physically beautiful paper, and the art and the design. It's really amazing. Encourage people to pick one up. Should we jump into some questions, or do you have anything else you want to share before questions, Claudia or Tyrone? Okay, so there was, when people registered, some folks asked some questions, so I have some of those I'm going to read, and then people are typing them in, so we'll try to get you what we can, but let's just jump in and we can have a conversation here. So I think this one was from Amy, that when she registered, but I'd love to ask both of you this, if you're willing to answer. What of your parents' history influences your writing?
Oh. Tyrone, I think you need to answer that.
Yeah, I think my parents were important, played an important role through my mother's beadwork. That's what the lady that I mentioned on Way, that's the lady that we acknowledged through her yellow buckskin dress. And so it wasn't all the time where she would teach me, but it would just kind of be here and there. And the last 2 years, my father's life is when I got to know him.
Mm.
And so that's kind of where a lot of stuff that he taught me was about the longhouse and about how we should remember stories. And then so it's kind of not only just interpreting how I see it, but also how they both played an important role, even though we didn't grow up together, but it was always that connection through our tenet and through our belief. And then so it's kind of, they played a role, but the more important role is my grandparents and my great-grandparents. And so they all had a profound influence in what books I should read and all those kind of things.
Thank you, Tyrone. Yes, you know, I grew up in El Salvador, so I think so much of my formative life took place in a different country. My parents were both teachers, so I was surrounded, even when many others, perhaps it wasn't common to have children's books and just books in general, and my parents were very thoughtful in that way, having children's books and you know, books around the house. And my father, I grew up my first years in a very teeny town, and the border was Guatemala, so 12 kilometers away from Guatemala, and there's lush volcanoes and just lush terrain, beautiful tropical terrain. And so my father was a big gardener, so nature was always a big part of my life. And I think it plays a role in my writing, and certainly traveling the river and being in this expanse is very different from my life growing up, because tropical spaces are very lush, right? And the Columbia Plateau is very expansive. But the kernel of seeking a beauty and being quiet in nature was planted a long time before that, when we were in El Salvador.
Wow.
Thank you both. We have a question from in the chat from Kim Stafford, who was the former, very most recent Oregon Poet Laureate. So we have 2 Poet Laureates here tonight speaking, but Kim's question is a great one. So to both of you, Tyrone and Claudia, if you could take a child to one place on the river so they could feel the spirit of the river, where would you go and what time of day?
What would you say, Tyrone? What is that answer for you?
I would say anywhere during sunset. And then so my auntie Kalu used to have a painting, and it was a picture of where we lived. And then when she would have visitors that weren't our family but wanted to get to know her, she would ask them, "What do you see in it?" And then they would tell her, and then she would point in, "Well, look outside. That's life, and that's what we need to protect." And so it's kind of, I don't see like one certain place anymore as being a specific spiritual power more than the other. I think it's all, we have to start seeing the divide and getting rid of that divide, but creating a connection more to it. So that's what I would, I guess, take somebody or a child or anybody.
I guess, hi Kim, that's so lovely that you have joined us. You know, one of the things I learned with the river was I thought mistakenly that when I was away from the gorge, because the gorge is so spectacular, the river would narrow and it would become, I don't know, smaller. And how mistaken I was, because the river is massive. By the time it enters Washington State, it is a tremendous force. And if you stand anywhere along that river, you cannot help but feel its power. And it tells you things, you know? The photograph that I shared of the confluence of the Twisp with the Columbia, Kim, is not far from your father, from one of the plaques of your father's poems that are along the Twisp River. And when I came, I was driving there, I'd never been there, and I thought, this is going to be a turbulent, it's a river meeting another river. So I thought it was going to be roaring sound and whatnot. And I stood there that afternoon when that photograph was taken, and it was absolutely quiet. The merging was such a quiet surrender, and an effortless surrender. And I pondered that very word there as I stood and watched, of yielding. This river that's rushing through the mountains, the Twisp River is rushing through, and yet when it meets the Columbia, it just gives itself into it, and it becomes larger than it was a few steps away from it. That was an incredible moment for me to think, to be there and hold that. But there are plenty. There's so many instances like that, the length of the river. It's magical all the way through.
That's great. And Claudia, I appreciate your photos of the, upriver photos. So much of, I live in the Columbia River Gorge and Hood River, and, a lot of people think of the Columbia, especially down here in Portland, as the gorge and the lower river and the estuary down by Astoria. And there's so much more than that. That's a very small part of the river, and it's 1,200 miles long, and some of the beautiful places you photographed and showed. And then also, way up into British Columbia, there's hundreds of miles of river. And I think we forget what a big, powerful system this is, and how it connects such a vast geographic area.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little note to read thank you from Virginia for sharing this to Claudia and Tyrone, but saying thank you for releasing in me so much emotion. I've been only a functioning machine for so many months. Thank you for reminding me of my own rich times on the river and those of my mother, uncles, and grandparents.
Mm.
Yeah. So, question from Eva. Claudia, how did you choose your style of voice for this poem?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I wanted to marry the form to the poem. So I had thought that an accordion book would be a great way of visually conveying and physically conveying this unfolding of this river. So the fact that I had thought about this form for so long, in a way drove my experience of writing it, because I knew that it would be, that it had to be a poem that rolled as the river rolls. So that, I think, was the unifying concept of the writing. And then I really allowed myself to go back. I went back a lot. I was sticking my hands in the river wherever I could, or standing by it, and just watching, and also doing a lot of reading, of course, because I am not from here. As I explained, and my interest in the river was one that focused on people, not the river. It was a huge change happened for me in the writing of the river, and that the personification of the what happens in the agency that the river gains and the address of you in the river was not how I started with the poem. It became a result of my engagement with the river itself. And, you know, just thinking and talking about it, meeting people like Tyrone, talking, being there. And so it evolved as I traveled along. So it's an unfolding in many ways, an unfolding of my own thinking and of you know, the shape of the book itself, which was a tricky concept. It's tricky to make it work, and that credit goes to Jenny Wilson, who I think embraced my idea of the accordion. But you know, how do you take an idea into an actual artifact like a book? And it was super fun working with her at that point. But I think that there were many evolving pieces that transpired concurrently with the writing of this book. And then the book I just allowed it to unfold that way. And it got, you know, I just let it be. I kept on adding things, and they seemed correct. They seemed right to get this breath, this long breath in there.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. There's a question of whether you can read it again, and you too, Tyrone. The answer to that is we are recording it tonight, and in the next couple days, by the end of the week, we will send everyone here a link so that you can watch that, and we'll share that on social media as well. So you can watch it, the reading again, and please share it with some friends if you think anyone else wants to watch it again. Or for the first time. I have a question based on our earlier conversations, Claudia. Why, you know, why did you want to collaborate with Columbia Riverkeeper? Like, why'd you reach out to us? And getting at, like, why is activism important to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I had the project handprinted through SVC and Jenny Wilson through a Kickstarter campaign that allowed me to gift these books to libraries across the state of Washington. And then Chin Music Press agreed to publish the book. And then I did a program for nonprofits across the state of Washington. And in that conversation with Gabriel Cruden, actually, up in Kettle Falls, I asked if he thought, it had occurred to me that it would be good to share the book through people who are actually doing the work of engaging with the river's waters and the life along it, as you said. And he, who deals a lot with nonprofits, suggested I reach out to you. And then I read your piece in the Seattle Times. It all happens at the same time. I read your piece, the editorial that got published in the Seattle Times. And I thought, oh, here was Gabriel telling me about this organization, and here is you, Brett, writing about the river. It was two of you, right, who wrote this piece.
Yeah, we did a piece on actually dam removal and letting the river flow on the Snake River, and it was with Jay Julius was the author, who is the former chair of Lummi Nation and a fisherman and a really amazing activist.
Yeah, and I mean, when you travel the Columbia River and you see the devastation of salmon runs because of the dams, it really makes you question their existence, frankly. And I know that it's a very complicated issue, but I wanted to do something then to give back to the river. When I approached the publisher, Chin Music Press, they agreed. They also have they endorsed the idea that collaborating with a nonprofit working on behalf of the river was a good idea. So it was a convergence of similar minds. And I'm just so happy that the book will be able to live on in this way, because there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do.
Yes. Yes. Tyrone, any additional thoughts on some of the work to do on the Columbia and your experiences of, anything that brings you hope or particularly, frustrated about or think is important? That's a loaded question, but I just want to open it up to you.
I think, well, for the long term, I see hope as far as creating my own space and networking, because it's very difficult to try to get treaty tribes involved with what we're trying to do. Personally, when we're doing open mics, there was nobody willing to even meet with us, but yet they want to go out on March 10th and then declare all these speeches when they're the descendants of the people that took money for the dam. And then not only say these speeches, but then claim lineage to our home. And then so that part is really frustrating, but also it's kind of, doesn't give me too much hope in the long run or for the short term. And then for the long run, personally, like I connected with, a lot of people through poetry, and I just need to find how I can get the resources to do what I need to do, not just for myself, but for others. And so it's really time consuming. That's the part that gets exhausting, but also see like how I can just develop in this voice and develop into where I can be comfortable sharing. That took a long time, because when I first started, I just wanted to write it and then post it and then not do anything with it. And then now I'm being asked to be in these kind of spaces. I'm being asked to host for other people. And I'm creating the relationships and creating a network of my own where I can create and not depend on any institution, but have the resources to say, well, this is what I can do. What story do you have, or where are you from? And then just connecting back to how those values of just basically introduce myself, and then other people know, and then so that they're willing to help out. And that's what happened with this project. And then so it's just or sometimes it gets frustrating, and other times it's rewarding within itself, because I open doors to other people and just keep growing and connecting.
Yeah. Thank you. May I add a small note, Tyrone, that when I was working on the book, I struggled with the ending. So the last line of the book is for the future, and I struggled with how to hold that hope, that the life to the river will come back, that indigenous communities will regain their connection to salmon. But then I heard a video where this was through an organization working on the rivers, an old video where this woman, Umatia, I think, from that area, says the river is sleeping. She said the river is sleeping. The river is there. It's blocked because of the dams, but it's there. And that changed everything for me, because I realized we work with this time frames of, now with a news cycle is not even a day, the news cycle is flipping so quickly, but the river has a life beyond that. The way in which the river moves is outside of those time constraints that we have. And that gave me hope that the river will overcome, it will happen, that it will wake up. And that that understanding of time offered through her, and what she was saying, when the little falls were drowned, we said the river is sleeping. That was so powerful for me. And that's what then allowed me to have that last line in the ending of the poem. And I think, Tyrone, what you're saying, when I hear you talk about your struggles to be present and to be heard, I think we should all be taking notice of that, because that's where we need to be. You know what I mean? That's where we need to be, is centering Indigenous voices who have so much wisdom, specifically when we're talking about this particular river. That's where it's at. And, you know, when people ask me questions, sometimes I don't know, but I think that there are folks who have closer relationships going back for generations and generations who have better answers. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I've seen quite a few questions written earlier and some coming in now about, you know, some issue-specific things on the Columbia, about the Hanford nuclear site and about dams, and I would love to talk in more detail about those, because I'm an environmental lawyer, not a poet, and that's what I know how to talk about. But we're not going to have time to dive into details for Hanford. There's some really important cleanup decisions happening right now. I encourage you to visit our website. I'll tell you some details on how to get involved. One of our really wonderful staff attorneys, Simone Anter, just did a webinar on Hanford that goes into a lot of detail. That you could find that on our website as well. And just back to dams for a second, and salmon, you know, the river is getting too hot for salmon survival, and the dams are heating up the river by creating these stagnant reservoirs, and the dams cause the problem, and then climate change, you know, makes it worse. And it's kind of an unforeseen or unappreciated problem, how salmon can't survive in hot water, and it's getting hotter and hotter every year. So not only the dams cause a lot of other problems, but if we don't do something about it, it's truly going to drive runs to extend the baking in the hot water. And so that's one of the big campaigns we're working on, is challenging the federal government, pushing the state governments to take some action on the hot water crisis right now.
Brett, when I was up in Kettle Falls, I had just been on the Spokane River and stuck my hand in that river, which was rushing through the particular place where I was, and my hand was frozen, because I'm a warm person, you know, I come from the tropics. It was so cold. And then I was up in Kettle Falls, north of Kettle Falls, so driving north into Canada. And I kept on looking at the map, and my map on my phone kept on saying Lake Roosevelt. And I kept on telling myself, no, this is the river. Why is it? And then I finally found a place where I could pull over and walk to the river and put my hand in it. And I was astounded at how warm it was, because I was expecting the chill from the Spokane. And it was just, this is all the way up there. And it wasn't even summer. It wasn't summer. And it was definitely warm and so still. I wrote a piece for the North Columbia Monthly about that experience of, you know, putting my hand and suddenly feeling just this. It wasn't life. It was not life. It was this heavy silence coming. And I didn't expect that, but it's exactly what you were saying. It was already warm, and it was, you know, probably maybe April, maybe May. So yes, it's real. You could feel it.
Yeah, and you know, salmon are a cold water species. Anything over 68 degrees Fahrenheit is dangerous to them, and the river's regularly, you know, now up to the low to mid 70s every summer, and Yeah, it's a problem. There's a big push right now for dam removal on the Snake River, the 4 lower Snake River dams, which will open up amazing habitat up in Nez Perce country and allow those salmon to survive and not go extinct. And then, Yakama Nation called last fall on Indigenous Peoples Day, called for the removal of some main stem Columbia dams too in the future of, allowing these salmon to run free. And that's a long process of replacing that power and those and all that involved with that, with transportation. But I'll tell you, I got the pleasure of watching on the White Salmon River. They took a dam out, one of the tributaries of the Columbia, and everyone was saying it would take the salmon, years or decades to return. And that very next year, salmon were jumping up over the waterfalls, returning to a place they hadn't been for 100 years. And that, that resilient, if we let the rivers flow, the salmon will come back and they will survive.
Mm-hmm.
We are getting towards the end of our time at 7 here. Why don't I do this? Why don't we, I'll give a couple thoughts on for closing here, and then if you're willing, Claudia and Tyrone, maybe we could do a couple more questions, go a little past 7, and for folks who want to stick around, can you hear a little more? Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
okay.
yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So, yeah, just a couple things to wrap up with. As I mentioned, you can, we will send a link around to people, encourage you to share this with friends, and encourage you to check out Tyrone's book, Washani Tales, and Claudia's book, the new book being released tonight, One River, 1,000 Voices. So you can buy this through Chin Music Press or Columbia Riverkeeper's website under the store tab. And some of the proceeds from that would go directly back to Riverkeeper and the fight for clean water and salmon and protecting Columbia. So thank you, Chin Music Press, and thank you, Claudia, for helping to fund some of this work. And just lastly, I encourage, folks to join Columbia Riverkeeper. If you become a member, that not only supports us financially, we have over 12,000 members that are powering this work. We have staff attorneys and community organizers and communications experts and scientists, and all of that takes resources. So you'd fund that work to fight for a clean Columbia. You'd receive action alerts in our newsletter to try to plug you into what's happening on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, so you can get more involved. One of the great joys of my job is getting to work with tribal nations and Native people. Columbia Riverkeeper was founded with the concept from some tribal leaders to work in solidarity with tribes and Native people, and so that's a really important part of our work as well. And I just wanted to give a quick thank you and shout out to a couple of people tonight. Gabriela Garcia, who's managed all the tech side tonight for us, and then Ubaldo Hernandez is also on here watching. Ubaldo is one of our community organizers that is working to engage with Latino communities in the Gorge, and has done a great job, and we're actually working with Claudia. I should also, one quick pitch, on January 27th, we have a poetry workshop that Claudia has agreed to do with Riverkeeper. The details are going to be announced, but we're trying to do some work in Spanish and English. And so if you're interested, save the date for the 27th, and we'll keep you posted on the details. That was all of my announcements. Oh, another thank you and shout out. I saw one of our board members, our Riverkeeper, Emily Washings, is on tonight. So hi, Emily, who happens to be friends with Tyrone as well. Okay, any other quick announcements before I go to a couple of questions? Claudia or Tyrone, do you have anything?
No, just gratitude. And also a little bit about going back to your question about this decision to partner with you. And for me, literature, that is the best kind of literature that transcends its this space that we traditionally think of as poetry, or or just story, right, prose. That it moves beyond that into the realm of, here we are, what you do and what's happening on the river. So I think that I really feel very fortunate that we're able to do this, so that the writing then moves into actual life and the fight for a cleaner river without dams.
All right. It looks like a lot of people are sticking around, so why don't we ask a few more questions? From Catalina. Claudia, can you tell us a little bit more about the process of writing the poem? How the idea began? How did you engage with communities and individuals along the way? What was that journey like?
Well, I did a lot of notes, immediate notes. So I kept small journals that I carried wherever I went to try to take notes of just small pieces of things I noticed around the river. The opening of the poem, it's an interesting one, for instance, because I was in Port Angeles after I did a series of readings there, and I was looking at the harbor there as the sun fell over the harbor, and noticed that the water and the sky became indistinguishable except for this very long walk, a breaking set of stones they have, and it was like a clamshell. And I noticed this observation in a notebook. I just took a note, as writers do. And later in the compilation of this poem, which was very much like making a nest, like a bird nest, a little twig here, a little twig there, a little piece of paper here. That's how the poem was composed and grew. I found in this notebook this reference to this clamshell, which made sense because I wanted to include in this poem the experience of Native peoples, because the river, the part of the river that we know as modern people right now is only a teeny, when you think how long this river it's been around, it's only a teeny fraction of it. But Native peoples have millennia living along the river. So I wanted to go back. I wanted for the poem to start back in time, even before there were no people. And so that opening with the clamshell, with the sky being the same, reflecting the water, and that's all there was in my imagination. That's all there was in the world, then became the seed that triggered the rest of the. Once that image migrated from the ocean to this setting of the river, it sort of spilled forward with all of these other little observations I had picked up along the way. But it was that kind of the seed for it, that opening image.
Oh, that's great. Tyrone, I'm sure it differs for all your different work, but can you tell us a little bit about your writing process?
Yeah, usually I just reflect and then I take notes. And a lot of my stuff used to be free verse. And then Yakima Coffee House Poets taught me how to structure. And so a lot of what I'd done when I first started was just going off the top because I copied lyrics. And then so I just try to match the lyrics and try to get it into a verse. And it wasn't until recently where I found out structures and learned about metric. And it's a lot of things I just keep notes and write my dreams. thing that I do. And another thing is just listening to what people have to say. And a lot of my work comes from what I hear from others and how I don't want them to feel isolated. And then so I try to structure it so it's not about me. I want us to be a collective instead of writing just in a single narrative. I try to fit in something where I can include others.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that's kind of how I detail my experience, and then letting people know that they're not isolated or alone. And then, so my writing process is kind of like, to me, it feels like it's repeating, but then oftentimes I feel like it's growing in such a way that that I'm proud of now, that I can express these things in different forms, and it's building towards a larger goal.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think we better end with the questions. Claudia and Tyrone, is there anything that you want to add before we say goodbye tonight?
I want to thank Tyrone for that last bit about thinking of community. Tyrone, when you write, that's central to your writing, because I think, we know that we are interconnected. Things are interconnected, right? You damage this small tributary, you will damage the whole river. And I think that doing things in community, like you're talking, like you put that into the very process of your own writing, like bringing others into the process. I think that's really powerful. Rather than the lonely writer over there hunched over in a desk, you're sitting there thinking, how can I, put my arms around these other experiences and bring those voices also to what I'm doing. And I think what we're doing here tonight is a little bit of that as well.
Yep.
All right. Hey, I just, to end, I wanted to read one last comment from Linda that says, Tyrone and Claudia, both of you took us on an exploration beyond these four walls. Thank you both.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I think is a beautiful,
thanks, Linda.
Yeah, very beautiful description of your journey you took us on tonight. So
yeah, no problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Claudia and Tyrone. Thank you for everyone who joined tonight. And yeah, I hope we can get together soon and continue this work to share some inspiration and art into the world, and also protect the mighty Columbia.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
You're welcome.
All right. Good night. Don't forget to pick up your book, right? Hot off the presses. And take care. Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah,
Good
have
night.
a good night.